what Porus does is he did what any commander would do. He tries to extend his left flank. So he takes his left wing and he says, redeploy further to the left, which means they come out of their positions, they turn in column of march, and they begin to move out to the left to prevent the envelopment.
As the Indians begin to march to the left, and with Conus also on the move, Alexander changes direction again. Instead of sweeping around Porus's left flank, he suddenly turns inward and cuts off the left wing from the main body of the army.
At the same time, Conus, who was ridden all the way around the battlefield, arrives at what we call the Schwerpunkt, or the critical point in the battle, and bang, slams into the left wing of Porus's army.
Now Porus is exactly where Alexander wants him. His left wing shattered, cavalry destroyed.
Alexander always seemed, whenever every battle that he fought, always seemed to be at the crucial point where the tactic shifted. The crucial point where instead of going out, he turned in, where he went through the gap or instead of around the gap. How you do that and at the same time be right out there with your guys is a rare talent.
Alexander now moves his heavy infantry against the Indian center, but Porus is not about to give up. He orders his archers to attack. The Indian bow is 6 feet of strong, flexible bamboo. To extend it fully, the archer must anchor the bow in the ground and steady it with his foot. Tremendous size gives it unparalleled firepower. Its arrows, with sharp bone or metal tips, can penetrate any armor. But because of the weather, the archers are ineffective.
It was raining the night before, and all those thousands of horses and men and elephants, they turned the ground to mud. The Indian army wasn't used to fighting during the rainy season. Its archers couldn't anchor their bows. Huge blow to Porus. He'd lost one of his most powerful weapons.
With his left wing destroyed, Porus's army is reduced to his infantry, his war-trained armored elephants, and their archers.
You didn't just fight the elephant. The elephant on top was what they call a howdah, which was an archer or spear platform, but they deployed with a squad of 13 infantry around them, the same way we'd use infantry to protect tanks today.
But the elephants do have one soft spot, their eyes. The Greek infantrymen attempt to secure their target.
I can imagine what would happen if an elephant's blinded in the eye. I mean, it just goes crazy. I mean, an elephant's an exceedingly big animal.
Through the chaos, Alexander pummels the Indian center and pulverizes its flank. Despite being trapped in a deadly two-sided attack, Porus fights on.
The center is collapsing on itself into a giant gaggle of 10, 12,000 men, animals, chariots, donkeys, horses, whatever, and it literally can't move, and the infantry is pressing against them, and cavalry is pressing from the side. In these kinds of battles, as long as you're maneuvering on the open plain, you don't take a lot of casualties, but when you close into close combat, it gets horrifically bloody because you can't maneuver. You can't even run away. I mean, the problem at the Battle of Hydaspes was you couldn't get away.
Brutal man-to-man combat, animals hacked to pieces. The Battle of Hydaspes turns into a gruesome massacre. Alexander and his Greek killing machine are destroying the Indian army at the Battle of the Hydaspes River.
Alexander commits what's left of his cavalry and orders it into a circle around this mass of quivering, frightened men.
Porus's army is caught in a death trap. It cannot maneuver.
10,000 human beings pressed by another 8,000 human beings in a cauldron of slaughter. The screams of animals, the trumpeting call of a wounded elephant, for example, the whinny of a horse in pain. And remember, if you fell down, if a horse slipped and went down or was wounded, or if a man fell off a, there were no saddles, but fell off the horse, he trampled to death.
Human beings being stabbed, being hacked at. The noise and the screams in the battlefield becomes quickly covered with blood, gore, and entrails. Pieces of human flesh.
And the smell. The smell, the smell, the smell. I mean, you know, elephants, when they're wounded, like many animals, defecate. And you can imagine that as well. The noise and the smell and the human horror, absolutely terrific.
About 7 hours after the battle begins, Porus's army is nearly destroyed. But Porus himself survives.
They're not completely destroyed, but probably 3/4 of the army is killed. Porus himself, badly wounded, continues to fight on.
Alexander admires Porus's bravery and determination to keep fighting in the face of certain defeat.
Alexander recognizes in Porus a kindred warrior spirit. He doesn't want to kill the man he's grown to respect, so he sends a messenger to call him for a meeting.
Greek historian Arrian records the conversation. Alexander was the first to speak. "What," he said, "do you wish that I should do with you?" "Treat me as a king ought," Porus famously replied.
Alexander is so impressed with Porus's dignity and composure, he decides to let him remain as king and keep his territories and his subjects.
So at the end of the day, Alexander, at the Battle of the Hydaspes River, shows his tactical brilliance. I mean, this is a guy who can read a battlefield. He has what Napoleon called the coup de wheel, the strike of the eye. By looking at the terrain, looking at the arrangement of forces, is able to devise, very quickly in this case, a tactical plan that plays to his own advantage.
With his victory at Hydaspes, Alexander the Great has taken his first step across the Indian frontier, but it is also his last. As he advances deeper into India, several states set aside their own rivalries and now stand united against the invader. At the next battle site, Alexander is confronted by 300,000 Indian troops.
In attempting to conquer India, you get the feeling that perhaps Alexander's strategic intelligence analysis was not as good as it had been in the past, because any reasonable view of what was going on in India at the time would have led you to the conclusion that this would be an almost impossible military task for what amounts to a small Greek army.
By now, Alexander's men can see that their leader's quest has turned into a suicide mission. They've been fighting long and hard, and mutiny is in the air.
He tries to rally them to keep going. He's inspirational, his troops are loyal, but they've just had enough.
Alexander, always attuned to his men, ultimately surrenders to the will of his troops and heads south, returning to Babylon in modern-day Iraq. But his eastern adventure may have cost him his life.
The best guess is that he died of malaria in Babylon, where history says, or at least the texts say, because he was considered to be Pharaoh of Egypt. His body was sent to Egypt, where it was embalmed, and put in a crystal casket.
Alexander the Great, one of history's most brilliant military tacticians, dead at 33. The conqueror of much of the known world, his record and his leadership skills still stand as the inspiration for great military minds throughout history.
During the First Gulf War in 1991, General Norman Schwarzkopf took a page out of Alexander the Great's playbook with his left hook strategy.
Like Alexander, Schwarzkopf essentially feigned a main attack on the Iraqi forces occupying Kuwait from the south. But the bulk of his force, modern-day heavy cavalry, tanks, swung hundreds of miles due west and came at the Iraqis' right flank.
There's the left hook, effectively knocking out the Iraqi army. Ground war in Operation Desert Storm was over in 100 hours. That is a successful feign and envelop that Alexander would be proud of.
Alexander the Great campaigned for more than 11 years, over 20,000 miles, and never lost a battle. Still, A forger of empires, with an unquenchable thirst for glory, Alexander spread Greek culture throughout the known world. Yet he died yearning to have conquered more.